Exercise 105 is about constructing graphs. Now, to be honest, the actual full graph is rarely asked to be constructed in a test situation just because they take so long. And like I said in the previous exercise, in the real world, graphs are rarely constructed by hand. They're almost always the result of putting information into a spreadsheet and getting the spreadsheet to construct the appropriate graph. You will notice that I have asked you here towards the end in your summary and your key points here, to use your textbook to identify the important points when considering constructing a graph. So we're going to cover quite a few graphs. Maybe you could imagine that a question or an important point to consider is the type of graph that you're going to use to display. So that, and along with some other points, are listed in the textbook, and I'd ask you to please make sure you include them in your summary and key points. Back to here, something that you are often asked to complete is a frequency distribution table, though. I wouldn't really say it's a graph, it's a table, and it's really just an organisation tool. So you can see here, I've provided you with some raw data. Now, raw data listed out like that is it's not very clear to see what's actually going on. That's just raw data. It's data about the number of CDs purchased by a person. So this person here purchased 0, the next person purchased 2, and the assumption with all of this is that they're just single digits. So don't read this as 56. It's one student purchased 5 and another student purchased 6. So actually getting that information organised into a table of values is really, it almost has to be step one. And once we've got it arranged in the table, then we can go on with organising the graph. So I will go through this process with you in class. And I'm sure this is not something that you've never seen before anyway. If you're feeling quite confident about completing the score column and the tally column, and tallies are little markings like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. You might remember that. Then you can complete this. If you're a little if you're not confident enough, then you can leave it because I will go through it with you in class. You can then see that we're going to take this information and we're going to put it into what I've called here a column graph. Please put that in brackets. In this course, it's going to be referred to as a bar chart. Now, there is no difference between this constructing a bar chart and constructing a column graph. There is no difference. The only difference is in the name. So, you know the features of a column graph. The columns must have the same width. So you'll need a ruler. Spaces between the columns must also be equal. And sometimes you won't see any spaces between columns. It's not a requirement to have spaces. Always label the axes and use a suitable scale, and the graph must have a title. So I'll fill those out in a moment, and you can complete your notes. One clarification about a suitable scale. You may be wondering what that is. If I had a horizontal scale here, like this, and this was representing the number of students in this case, the number of students, similar to this graph, and I can see that the greatest number of students is 10 that I need to fit on here. If I mark off a scale like this, where this is 10, 20, 30, 40 students, etc., then that would be deemed to be an unsuitable or inappropriate scale. My tallest column here for 3 CDs would only ever get to here. That is clearly not making the most of the space that I have. That would be a very unsuitable scale. So that's what I mean by that. I'm sure you wouldn't do that sort of thing anyway, but I just thought I would clarify what I meant by a suitable scale. At this point, I want to talk about an additional chart which is based on a bar chart that I've included at the end of the notes, and for you it was a separate piece of paper. So I'm just going to pause the video and scroll through to the end of this document where those notes are. Okay, now this is something that it is new to you, the syllabus change. These charts have not been part of the graphs we've looked at previously. It's called a Pareto chart. It is commonly used, I think, in the business situation, and maybe they've introduced it into this course for students who go on to study business at university. And in particular, it's used for categorical data. And we saw that bar charts or column graphs are suitable for that situation. In particular, they're used for quality control. So when a business is evaluating how they're going, for example, this business has looked at its complaints. It's obviously evaluating what people are saying about the business, because as I'm sure that most businesses would want to improve and keep their customers and make changes as needed, then they're collecting data about that sort of thing. And you can see here that this is this particular restaurant has gathered some data about customer complaints. Now, the thing about the Pareto chart is it combines a bar chart or a column graph, which has to be constructed in this order. So, as you can see, this data was data collected about complaints. So some of the complaints, the most common complaint was the food was overpriced. The next most common was small portions. Then the wait time, food is tasteless, no atmosphere, not clean, too noisy, food is too salty, unfriendly staff, and food not fresh. The fact that it has been graphed from most common complaint to least complaint is a requirement. So all Pareto charts have to be constructed with their highest frequency result appearing first and then progressively down to the least. Now, there is a concept called the Pareto concept, and it says that 80% of complaints are usually determined by 20% of the causes. So the two main causes are out of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2 out of 10 is exactly, converted to a percentage, is exactly 20%. So you can see here, 80% of the total people surveyed put their complaints into 20% of the areas of complaint. Now, the percentage of people complaining is also drawn on here via a line graph. So it says up here, a Pareto chart is a combination of a bar chart and a line graph, and they're both on the same graph. It is pretty easy to see that we jumped with the number of people surveyed up here to 80%. 80% of the people surveyed is now covered by these two areas that they've identified as issues. That makes it very easy for the business to address these if they want to reduce the number of complaints that they get. So yes, 80% of complaints over these two areas. Address these two areas and you should be able to improve your business. A bar chart must be presented in descending order. I've spoken about that, with the most common complaint first. And the line graph represents the cumulative frequency of the data. How many people actually indicated that food was overpriced, had small portions, and by the time we're here, we're up to our 80%. You can see now I've scrolled back to a line graph. I think you would be familiar with how to graph a line graph. Again, we've got a heading, a title for our graph, we have our axes labelled, and this is based on the information up in the frequency distribution table as well. And we plot the points above the scores, which in this case are the number of CDs, and we join them up. Simple, I'm sure, like I said, you've seen that before, and there's nothing new to learn about that. I spoke in the previous section exercise about a divided bar graph, and I'll just quickly go over it. We need to express each section as a percentage. Let me write that one out. Make the bar 10 centimetres long, because that is the equivalent of 100 millimetres, which then equates exactly to the percentage. And you can use your scale that 1 millimetre is 1%. So for however many percentage each section is, you mark off that distance in millimetres. That's a divided bar graph. Sector graph I spoke about as well, and again express each section as a fraction, decimal or percentage. And use this to find the angle size. Now, I'm thinking that you should be right then to do exercise 105.